Charlie, this doesn't look like Cambridge.
When I was sent the script, I thought I'd be spending the next 7 years in Manhattan. But no, it's not the island, it's the project.
You're building an atomic bomb.
We prefer to call it a gadget.
The astonishing truth, which is stranger than fiction.
What this show taught me was, what was going on the inside.
Our work is so classified, the vice president doesn't know we exist.
And that's one of the great joys of being an actor, is you get to go back to school.
When we got there, they took us on a tour of Los Alamos. We met some scientists, and I can now build my own nuclear bomb if I had to.
What was it like to be the science team at Los Alamos? What was it like to be a kid growing up in this town, this bizarro Twilight Zone world of secrecy?
Within the confines of these fences, technically you're nowhere, talking to no one.
Being in a place where secrecy is paramount, but privacy really means nothing. It can destroy your mind.
All these people were dragged out of their lives and dropped in the middle of a desert, which Tommy and Sam depicted quite nicely.
I made a commitment. It is done. We're here till the end of the war.
Our intention is to make a very contemporary show that explores human beings now and our interactions with each other.
I wrote the first draft of the first episode of Manhattan years ago, and it actually began as a totally different show set in the present day about the War on Terror. I realized that it was going to be very hard to write about current events with any kind of moral objectivity.
Yes, that's why they call it the fog of war.
The story of the birth of the atomic bomb is also very much the story of the birth of the country that we live in now and the culture that we're reckoning with. And this town that was built to basically facilitate the invention of the weapon, but the vast majority of the people who lived there had no idea what the purpose of the town was.
I understand. There's some kind of crisis at work.
You have no idea.
What does it do to a marriage? What does it do to a society? Is it the island mentality? You put a group of people into a small space and watch to see what happens.
And that, to me, it suggested such a complicated network of relationships that I knew it was something that I kind of had to write about. It was my good fortune to be put in touch with Tommy Schlamme. He's one of the great storytellers that the medium of TV has produced.
We immediately just partnered up. Sam was very clear of the stories that he wanted to tell and the progression of how this would be a series.
If it works, we won't just end this war. We'll end all war.
The amount of reading that the writers did would have drawn them to a few stories and characters that accumulated to become our 10 characters. Charlie's definitely not based on any one man. He's fueled by the stories of that time.
From the beginning, the creative choice was to populate a world that was as carefully researched and as factually accurate as it could be with fictional characters, so we could tell fictional stories about their interior lives.
One of the reasons that I love television so much is the element of evolution that exists in television. We knew at the end of the season what was going to happen between Thin Man and Implosion, but all the little intricacies of the way that people relate and what's really happening to their lives evolved.
You can grow old and die writing white papers on field quantization, or you can join my team and you can watch the apple fall with Newton.
We have an incredible cast, and it took a while to find them and to sort of put this dream team together.
People who we really believed could sort of consume this material and bring it to life in a certain way.
John Benjamin Hickey was one of the very early names that we talked about.
I had never come across somebody who was so brilliant at his job with such a terrible bedside manner.
Get home safe.
I found that character so fascinating and the greatest compartmentalizer I'd ever read on paper.
John has taught me a great deal about who Frank is. He has such depth and a sense of the cost and the burden of this work that he's involved with.
I made sacrifices for this project you couldn't possibly fathom.
It's hard to think of anyone else playing Frank. It's hard to think of anyone else playing any of these roles.
No!
Whatever it is, Frank, you can tell me.
I wrote this role with Olivia in mind.
I don't want Liza to be predictable either as an adoring wife or as a trenchant feminist. I want her to be compassionate, and I think it's partly compassion that drives her to investigate what's going on.
Wonder who they're gonna murder today.
The whole thing is horrible.
Rachel was the second person I read before we even started, and she was so right.
Initially, when I read the script, I wanted to play Helen really, really badly. And now, obviously, I'm totally in love with Abby. She is the coolest character, and her journey has been incredible, and I'm so thrilled with where it's gone.
In some ways, she's the person who is the greatest fish out of water in the world of Los Alamos.
Abby, what the hell did you do to Joey's hair?
Children have head lice, and they are eating our mail.
And yet, Rachel has such presence and life in every moment that she plays. She's impossible not to love.
I'm going home, Charlie.
The Army won't allow it.
I looked into it. There's one way that they will.
What way?
If we're divorced.
Charlie was the hardest role to cast. This was all about the older gunslinger and the new gunslinger that comes to town, and that sort of was the momentum of season 1.
Ash Zuckerman had this incredible quality of a mix of a kind of hopeful youth about him, and also something really complicated and dark as well.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Right now we have to figure out a way to keep you safe.
Reed is a metaphor. I mean, he's an allegory of a scientist of that time who was destroyed by a lie and who was destroyed ultimately by building a weapon of mass destruction as well.
If we fumble this ball, we won't be looking at delays. The game will be over. Glenn?
Danny Stern plays Babbitt. Babbitt, in a way, is the closest thing that Frank has to conscience. Danny came in and he had this like incredible beard, and there's a sort of mad genius quality to it. And there was such sort of depth to the way that he played the relationship with Frank.
Maybe other actors work different, but my history, where I've been is important. Where I'm going is unknown, and probably better for me to not know.
Shall we begin? The point of Occam was that we didn't really know what his department was. The mystery was important, I think, because it created an intangible sense of danger.
Is your boss in? I have some questions for Dr. Winter.
Do I know you?
Meeks is a guy who, in the world of our show, harbors a huge secret.
Things have changed.
They're changing everywhere.
Implosion is taking center stage.
It was one of those things that Sam did that was a really smart thing. It helped Chris all the way through, and I think he was a sophisticated enough actor.
There were deep personal seeds for his betrayal that the writers had planted so smartly.
Helen Prince?
Yes?
Gather your personal items, ma'am.
When we were casting Helen, and we read so many Helens. Katya came in, read really great. She was so clear, and I went, cast her right away. There's an energy here that, especially in a world all of men, that I get this incredible combination of this kind of unique, weird, strange, very powerful energy, and she's beautiful.
And she has this great speech to Charlie when they sit at the bar, and she says something about how this is her time.
For however long the war lasts, I get to do what I love.
I immediately started thinking about, women in that time.
You want me to sleep with they're all whores? They're capitalists. It's basic economics, supply and demand.
I took econ at Cornell. This definitely wasn't on the syllabus.
Michael Chernus, I think he's like one of the great comic actors working today. But he also is like a great dramatic actor. There's something really heartbreaking that he brings to that role. It slays me when I watch those scenes.
You have to bring levity to a rather heavy, harrowing situation, but you could feel that there was more than meets the eye to these characters. And you have a sense that there's this whole history underneath the surface.
Don't walk out that door!
I thought the characters were all really well drawn and really interesting. You have a bunch of guys working on a weapon to, destroy the world. I mean, after the invention of the atom bomb, I don't think the world is the same.
100 American kids have been buried since the last time we walked through that gate. By tomorrow morning, there'll be 100 more. And you want me to slow down?
Of
course not.
We have a lot of ideas about what World War II stories are supposed to look like, what they sound like, what they feel like. But it was really important to me, and I think to Tommy too, that this show feel a little different. There is something so peculiar about what life must have been like for people in this sort of cross between a prison camp and a university campus.
This entire hill was built on secrets, Frank. They're traded around like ration stamps.
Giving the show a sense that you never quite know who you can trust or what you can trust. That felt really important, and it certainly translated into the way it was scored by Yonsi and Alex. That is eerie and beautiful and peculiar and modern and doesn't quite feel like the score you expect from a period drama. All of that was really, really important to us.
It's such a complicated world, and it took all of us a long time to figure out like what it was for these people. And what's great about the show is that I feel like we're figuring it out as they are.
The moral conundrum that these characters find themselves in, I think they just got up and kept going to work. I don't think any of them thought maybe that bomb wouldn't be or shouldn't be dropped, but tell that to the mothers who all got to see their boys come home because we ended the war.
American war dead as of this morning.
There are moralists among us, Charlie Isaacs being one of them, and he tells in the first episode the story of the Golem.
First, the Golem kills the enemies of the Jews, then it turns on the Jews themselves. So you couldn't control it. He'd built Frankenstein's monster.
What's important is to understand the emotional question of what is it like coming to your dream job and finding out it's a job that will destroy every moral line that you've put up. Those were the questions that Tommy and Sam helped us form, and that's the show.
This story is kind of a great American origin myth. This is the story of the opening of this atomic Pandora's box that we're reckoning with now. I mean, we live in an era in which weapons of mass destruction are not an abstract idea. What we set out to do was to try to dramatize a lot of different and contradictory points of view and hope that the viewer can come to his or her own decision about it.
I think great television can stir you emotionally, psychologically, and I think one of the things you see in this origin story is the beginning of the modern world as we know it.
We cherish life. It's in our nature. Unfortunately, our enemies do not. Doubt is a luxury we cannot afford.
There's an aspect to Charlie's journey, which is that he comes to this amazing place and he gets to work with giants of his industry, people he's looked up to for so long, and that's what I got to do.
I love acting. It's action and reaction and drama and humor, and having a bunch of other actors and directors and creative people around you who enjoy the same thing.
It's been very wonderful to be part of something that feels so relevant and important.
I mean, I'm incredibly honored to be representing one branch of, I think, a lot of different kinds of women who arrived there.
I mean, so incredibly proud of the show that we made.
To be able to write so many characters, so many issues, personal, political, military, the Nazis, the Native Americans. I mean, Sam is just an epic novelist.
It's been the gift of a career to be able to work on a show that's been such a labor of love for me for so long, with this incredible crew. I feel like we've sort of just begun to tell the stories that I think are inherent in this world and the kind of complicated set of relationships between the characters.
I loved making it, and the love of science was the same thing, and the love of, truthfully, of war and combat. And I do think season 2 is completely that discussion. No longer is it, can we make a bomb? Season 2 is, we can make the bomb.
Excuse me. Hi. Where's everybody going?
P.O. Box 1663. Welcome to nowhere.
When it comes to this kind of work, it's very true that God is in the details. You depend so much on the stuff that you have around you that takes you back to that time and place. And we had the most extraordinary production design team.
Your attention, please. Socializing with persons outside of this community is prohibited. These measures will reinforce the sense of privacy and peace of mind this community enjoys.
It adds a layer of authenticity to the whole thing, and it was incredible. It's huge. They built this whole town.
Welcome to Manhattan.
It was a fully realized world. We created a security gate. You had to go through the security gate every day to go to the set, and you felt that. It became part of everyday life.
It just automatically kind of placed you into that world. And I feel so thankful that we got to work on those sets in New Mexico as opposed to some soundstage somewhere.
Right out of the gates, Tommy had this beautiful, totally impractical idea about how we should produce this show. His pitch to the studio was, let's just build a town.
I knew that I did not want this show to be on a stage. The feeling of everything that I was reading about both Los Alamos and the script told me that if I can kind of create an environment that we can take actors and do with them sort of what the American government did with these scientists, pick them up and throw them in the desert.
They were able to secure 10 acres that had all of these buildings that had been built in the 1940s that this college just gave to the production.
But how we would turn that ugly sort of old shacked buildings into this sort of Los Alamos world had to be in somebody's imagination more than just mine.
It gave us a kind of world that we could turn into sort of a 1940s atomic theme park.
They were able to take over a large enough swath so that in every direction you looked, you either saw something period or you erected a billboard or some other detail that would block out what was not period.
Ruth just grabbed hold of this thing and saw the idea and was very instrumental in creating the sort of texture, the color, the world of the show.
Frequently, you're building things that are charming and cute and full of life and history. Tommy was trying to always stress that everything was brand new, everything was in transition. As people were arriving in their cars with their wives and children, they were building more houses and more warehouses and more research labs.
Yoo-hoo! Hello. Hello. We're the welcome wagon.
So Tommy and Sam and the production design team were able to build basically a back lot, the likes of which hasn't been seen since the 1940s in Hollywood.
As we'd build sets throughout the shooting of the show, there was always a concern for period accuracy, and there was also a concern for character. How does the set talk about the character and what they're going through at that story point?
There was a choice that we made early on not to recreate the exact floor plans of housing and laboratories from Los Alamos, which we could have done and we sort of talked about it, but ultimately it's a work of fiction. It's a sort of interpretation of history and it's very carefully researched, but the interior lives of the characters are all fictitious. And so it felt kind of important that we create our own Los Alamos.
Watch it, buddy. Get out of the way.
I sort of handed the playground to Ruth, and then she took this 12-acre old hospital and turned it into 3 very unique different things. So all on this 12 acres is a science tech area, the sort of town community area, and Charlie's neighborhood area.
We started working with sight lines. If you were in the Thin Man unit, how you could look over to Implosion unit. Where the military would be. We put the kind of military base between the Thin Man lab and the Implosion lab. So you start kind of sculpting it from some of the existing buildings, knocking some structures down and adding to existing structures.
In the end, I would say there were sets that made it very easy for the work to look great because she had put so much care into what their palette was, into what the textures were, and making sure that we were never up against something that felt false.
When it came to the housing, I felt like I had to really push those colors much further than someone who was going and matching exact period colors.
It was a constant modification as we were going. By the time the cast got there, it was pretty exciting.
The first week we were there, you'd wander around into buildings and you'd open a door. You'd be expecting like an empty room, but no, there'd be like desks full of period typewriters and equipment, and every room you opened was like this whole other world. And that's just really helpful as an actor to be able to live in a world like that.
It's all an illusion, isn't it?
When I first walked around on these sets, it was like I'd had a dream, and suddenly the dream was real. And you could open the cabinets in the dream, and they were full of china and full of cups, and the drawers were full of No. 2 pencils from 1941.
I definitely took advantage of those sets when I first got there. For my first day of shooting, I just spent some time walking around and telling myself, I'm the king of this place. This is my place, And it gave me this sense of Oppenheimer's power and of his sort of stature, and that was pretty exciting for me.
There were practically real environments as much as possible, and those real environments not only feed the actors' work, they feed my belief that my framing is going to include something about their lives that's going to come across through the work.
I mean, it's an incredible luxury to be able to work on a set, A, so specifically built, but also B, not on a stage. When we open the window and say, our neighbor's house over there, it's really over there, and we can see it, and you can breathe the air, and that puts such life into the whole thing.
We had it coming out our ears on this show, and I mean, as an actor, it's the greatest gift to be able to have all of that attention to detail. Because it makes you dig deeper, it makes you work harder.
And we modified the set to them when we found out where Fritz would sit, who, as we started to define the characters, realized that he was far more involved with explosives, with chemistry and explosives and putting things together, and he was the sort of expert in that area. And it's not really visually that noticeable in the show, but above his desk on the ceiling, it's all burnt because he's blown things up above him.
What the? No.
It took so many people back to that time and place. And, you're also not only just dealing with sets, buildings, you're dealing with myriad props from a time and place.
Oh, they have Tommy Dorsey. Oh, you might have to take me for a spin.
Prop master that we had, which is extraordinary. He started to sort of work with each one of the actors, and they sort of personalized it beyond this wonderful world to sort of step into.
Everywhere you looked, everywhere you turned, every drawer you opened, you were in 1944. You were not where we are today. I'm sure eBay was like, what the hell's going on down there in Santa Fe? Where are these people buying all these microscopes from the 1940s?
In a way, the filming environment started to mirror the way Los Alamos must have felt to the scientists and families that had to stay there.
Harry Lloyd and I were able to give a tour of the set to 3 different women whose fathers had been pretty prominent scientists at wartime Los Alamos, and they were moved to tears when they saw the set. And so that was really cool to get a firsthand account of the place.
What happens next?
We're walking into a second season with the luxury of just storytelling and not how are we going to build the world, what are we going to do. We have this world, and the writers are now writing to the world that we have. It does exist, and it didn't exist at all.
And you can keep on building on it. Nothing is ever finished. Los Alamos started out with like 20 people, and by 1945, there were 6,000 people there. So we're kind of doing the same thing.
I really felt connected to the story because we were living in the spot and because the surroundings had been so totally transformed as to reflect period, reflect a military presence, reflect the presence of science as a burgeoning and hopeful enterprise. The success of the show visually is the work of many people working together.
We got some of the best minds in America here, maybe the world.
It's just a totally different experience from any I'd ever had before. It gave the actors and the directors an incredible freedom. I think there was huge flexibility for everyone to be really inventive and be spontaneous, and that was a gift that we had because they were living in Los Alamos while we were shooting the show in a real way.
It was a marathon. Every single day was so interesting. When you get to do a show about that level of intelligence and creativity and passion, it's great.
If I die of embarrassment today, do you promise not to bury me in this uniform?
Period costumes are really important to look like they're from the period that you're shooting, and they can really contribute to the believability of what you're doing.
You're crooked.
Charlie made sense from the moment I put that on and stepped off. The shoes, the pants, the jacket, the tie. It all got me closer quickly.
I'm protecting you.
By building some machine that could wipe us all off the face of the earth.
Alonzo and team are brilliant. They had such a specific idea of what they wanted every character to be and what they wanted every character to look like.
They just continually outdid themselves. And that made me feel like Frank Winter was the clothes, and especially my hat.
I think Alonzo looked at every piece of wardrobe as an opportunity to advance the story and deepen character and teach the audience about who these people are.
I'm not a fashion person. I'm a character-driven costume designer. And doing this show, like bringing history to life was amazing.
You look like a goddess.
Thank you.
Tommy, Shlami, and Sam wanted me to do the show, mainly because I sort of specialize in the real-life look of things. They wanted the costumes to reflect a struggle of life in the middle of the desert, dusty, disrupted. They didn't fit into Los Alamos.
The world of our show is such a complicated salad of different kinds of personalities. There's the military, there were these sort of expat European scientists there are collegiate types. So it was important to feel those differences, I think, in the costume design.
What I had in my head was simply make them feel like they're real, that they're not on a TV show. And Alonzo just took it on a way more creative, deeper, and brilliant conceptual idea.
And I think Alonzo was having fun with the period of this show. When I looked in the frame and saw all these women dressed period, made up period, hair period, and just how great that looked, it really contributes to the overall quality of the show.
How do I look? Glasses or no glasses?
Preparing for the costumes for the show, the research is one thing, but you have to assess what's available. So I had to pull from period costume houses. We bought some things from vintage places locally in New Mexico. Most of the other costumes that were rented came from California.
There was thought in the idea of where color would start to really pop out. There was so little color there. But when it was there, it was pretty saturated color because those prints were the prints of the 40s. It was a very colorful time in clothing. If you talk to any one of our actors, they'll talk about their character was informed greatly by Alonzo's ability to sort of help them understand who they were by the clothes that they wore.
Is that a piece of costume jewelry on your chest? Excuse me?
John Benjamin Hickey's character, Dr. Winter, he had suits, but he really did not dress neatly. He was always disheveled. He hardly ever shaved. And as easy as that may sound, it's hard to make that look real.
You know, when you put a fedora on like that, man, you know, like you're back in that time and place. Like you feel like Bogey. That was an amazing period in clothes.
I've known fellas like you. You slip into the faculty club with a blazer and a smile. You spent your whole life fighting your way to the top of the mountain.
Charlie Isaacs, you know, I look at him as the Wall Street guy of scientists. You know, the suit's always done really nicely, his tie's up and everything. He later makes the transition as he gets his elbows in and, you know, rolls up his sleeves.
The biggest mystery I've been pondering since I got here is what the hell the rest of you have been doing for the last 3 months.
I cannot speak more highly of his storytelling ability. And what Alonzo taught me very early was that Charlie spent 6 years married into money. And I loved that conflict. I loved that already Charlie is a working class kid on the inside and pretending something on the outside. And I think that's the whole ball game.
And then there's Fritz, who is basically can't fit any of his clothes. You know, that was one of the ideas from Tommy. So we always had little tight shirts and, you know, things like that.
Alonzo was able to somehow track down a lot of vintage items too. This gray coat I'm always wearing in the show is from '42, and it just has this
smell to it. You know, it smells like Pall Malls or some old cigarette or something, and that kind of stuff just really, really helps.
I put my hand in my pocket once and pulled out a ticket stub from a movie from 1938.
The fabrics of the costumes were really cool. They were all period, too.
He can split the atom, but ask the man to tie a half Windsor.
Reed Akeley is probably the most stylish person on the Hill. He reflects that sort of finesse that sort of speaks, again, kind of in contrast to what's going on inside.
You're focused on today's problem. I'm talking about tomorrow's.
We decided that Occam would only have one suit, so he would just wear this gray three-piece suit. And I think I took off the jacket just once.
And let's not forget the curious affair of Glenn Babbitt, your mentor. What a colorful character.
Glenn Babbitt, he's in two suits kind of the whole time, but every time he's in a different tie.
And he wears different socks all the time. He had 10 or 12 different pairs of socks.
What was that? You're gonna love it here.
Abby Isaacs from the big city, in the beginning, very colorful. And then later, we made some costumes with floral print that were faded and less colorful. So we sort of made her sort of blend in for a while with the surroundings as she sort of lost her way.
I love all Abby's outfits. My favorite one, I think, is the one that she wears on the train to go see her parents. There's also amazing house dresses. It's also an amazing thing that people wore dresses like that to clean the house. That's a different story. But you wear lipstick to dust your bookshelves. It's great.
I don't think we belong here. You're not a possession. You don't belong one place or another.
The costume that Abby wore when Elodie takes her out on the town to the juke joint, we had a lot of back and forth with the writers, because originally it was written that it was something she was going to wear from her closet.
Is this everything you brought?
But nothing in Abby's closet would really do the trick for that, and they rewrote the scene.
You'll borrow something of mine.
That's one of the examples where writing, costume sort of really come together when we were really trying to tell a story. And what's great about Sam and Tommy and Dusty and all the writers, they listen. Like, they actually want your input so that we can tell a better story.
Somebody's got to sound to the history books. Might as well be a woman for once.
Helen Prinz, in our story, the only real featured female scientist. The challenge was, how do we make her somewhat appealing without making her too sexy?
I especially liked about Helen that she always wore pants. I always wore pants. I once wore a skirt, but only so that we could pull it up so I could have sex with somebody in the car.
You done?
Yeah.
Okay.
It would be easier. But she's a pants girl.
And finally, we have Dr. Liza Winter.
Olivia Williams was, from the very beginning, my idea of Rosie the Riveter. And part of that was she wears pants. Just that opening introduction of Abby and Liza. Liza walks up with her headband on and sunglasses and that white blouse and high-waisted pants. I mean, it's a very strong image, and that really needed to be done.
You know, most women would kill for a night off from their husbands.
I'm not most women.
You certainly are not.
It's a little Katharine Hepburn. It's like she's a total gal who can play with the big boys.
Colonel, you have asked us to live without bathtubs and stoves, and that's fine. I think we all agree we're happy to make those sacrifices of modern conveniences if it's going to help us win this war.
There are many challenges in doing a period piece, especially on a location like in the middle of the desert. It's dusty for real.
I really like that aesthetic. I often find those things where you have creative limitations and then you develop an aesthetic around those limitations.
The whole thing was so real. I can't say that enough. I had a costume that was missing a button, you know, and it's fantastic.
I think the attention to detail really helped us all to get into this world and into our characters.
We were all dressed and brought into this time and place to where you hardly felt like the outside world even existed.
Doing Manhattan sort of rekindled an excitement about what costumes are to a character and then how it translates to the story. It's just exciting to bring it to life.
We have spent more than $2 billion on the greatest scientific gamble in history, and we have won.
There were so many things I found out about Oppenheimer that were truly fascinating and shocking, really.
Oppenheimer is a guy who is full of contradictions. He is this really mysterious figure.
An ambivalent man at best, probably the only man for the job. I think he thought that he was destined for greatness.
Obviously, he's sort of the name that we all think of when we think of the Manhattan Project.
J. Robert Oppenheimer was born in 1904 in New York City. He was the child of Julius Oppenheimer, a very wealthy textile merchant who was an immigrant from Germany, and his wife was Ella Oppenheimer, an artist.
He had a really privileged upbringing. He was Jewish, but sort of lost touch with a connection to his Judaism.
He ended up feeling very conflicted about this privilege and feeling very conflicted about his place in the world. He was recognized as very bright from the very beginning. He was also very awkward in the very beginning. He was one of these very smart children who did not know how to be tactful and suffered for it.
It's such an honor to finally meet you, sir.
Pulling you from Thin Man.
He would go on to become an undergraduate at Harvard University.
He had different kinds of class aspirations. So at a really young age, he goes out to New Mexico, becomes obsessed with the landscape, and I think part of that was trying to reinvent himself.
After he graduated, he initially was studying chemistry, but he decided towards the end of his undergraduate career that he'd like to perhaps study physics in a more serious way, and he ended up going first to England. Oppenheimer had a terrible time at Cambridge. He was really no good at the experimental work that was expected of him. He was bad at things with his hands, and he also just didn't fit in.
He was going through some issues. He hadn't really found his footing as a physicist yet. There's a story that he actually tried to poison his professor with a poison apple, and another story where apparently over a woman he had attacked and almost tried to kill his best friend.
He ended up, however, falling in with the theoretical physicists, a group of people who sort of had helped revolutionize quantum mechanics. And Oppenheimer saw this opportunity to remake himself and was extremely successful.
And he was incredibly brilliant, and people found him endlessly magnetic and fascinating.
Fission was discovered and announced late 1938. By late 1939, there are some scientists who are interested in whether or not you could use it to make an atomic bomb or a nuclear reactor that you could use for military purposes. General Groves was chosen by the Army Corps of Engineers to take this research project and turn it into an actual bomb production project.
And the advice that General Groves was getting was that he needed to put someone with a Nobel Prize in charge of the project.
He got to be introduced to Oppenheimer, and he decided that Oppenheimer was the man to do this.
But when he was chosen by Groves, others kind of raised their eyebrows.
Oppenheimer did not have a Nobel Prize, but people recognized and responded to his brilliance.
He always thought that he was destined to do great things, and by the time the Manhattan Project had come around, he was on the tipping point of being past his prime, and he hadn't won the major accolades. He went into this project with a fury and a recklessness.
So it was exciting for us to be able to dramatize him. He's the one person associated with the project, and often he's depicted as a great American hero or a kind of tragic American figure.
This country, the Valle Caldera, call it a desert, but it's a crematorium.
Daniel London does a great job of inhabiting that spirit.
Sam's conception of Oppenheimer for this piece is this almost godlike looming figure that was revered and feared somewhat.
Although he's not center stage in our story, it's really exciting to be able to engage with that sort of myth of Oppenheimer and explore some of the different facets of his personality.
Man is made by his belief. As he believes,
So he is. You know, I got in my hat and I got my costume and I had my cigarette. It really sort of transformed me in a way that was surprising to me.
They have this uncanny physical resemblance. And that was not the reason that we cast Daniel. That's a side benefit, although it really, truly is a little bit spooky. But he brought this almost extraterrestrial intensity to the performance that I just found riveting.
Friends of Frank Winter don't have a long shelf life on this hill, do they?
When Oppenheimer initially planned out Los Alamos, it was going to be large, but not as large as it ended up being.
And he was a real go-between between General Groves and the science side of things. So he was like a great politician. I think he never imagined being in this position, but sort of rose to the occasion.
So they get started in 1943, and they have to have that bomb done by mid-1945.
I think Oppenheimer, from the beginning, he had a real sense and understanding of the urgency required to bring this to fruition, knowing that the Germans were on the trail of developing this bomb as well.
They managed in about a year's time, almost to the day, to have a working prototype of this, which is what the Trinity test was.
There's a great argument to be made that of all of the brilliant choices that were made in the course of trying to bring the bomb to life, that the most brilliant choice of all was Groves' choice to hire Oppenheimer.
After Hiroshima, after the reports came in, after Nagasaki, after they started getting the death counts, after they started getting the first reports of radiation poisoning, Oppenheimer was more gloomy. He was not as high-spirited as he had been after Trinity.
He became a figure, a personification of the kind of moral objection to the bomb later in life.
From 1945 until about 1953, Oppenheimer was a major advisor to the U.S. government about all manner of nuclear weapons. And one of the controversies he got involved with was whether the United States should build a hydrogen bomb.
He was opposed to making the hydrogen bombs, or the so-called super bombs. So at some point he started to get in the way of people that did want to build these bombs. Ultimately, his security clearance was removed. He went back to doing physics and did fine physics. He was the head of the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study.
I think Oppenheimer knew exactly what he was doing, and that's what plagued him. There's also a great argument in science that advancement isn't destructive in itself.
I do feel like there's a sense that his legacy was somehow tarnished and diminished by the way he was treated in those latter years.
His final years were not extremely happy ones. He drank a lot. His wife drank a lot. They fought a lot. He was a very bitter man. He eventually, in the early 60s, showed signs of throat cancer, and that's eventually what killed him.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Oppenheimer was a big fan of Bhagavad Gita as a work of philosophy, and this is a Hindu holy book. Oppenheimer isn't in charge of who lives and dies. That has nothing to do with him. The possibility of nuclear weapons means that he has to do his duty and do this thing that may be terrible, but he has to do it because that's who he is, that's where he is in history, and is it going to end up well? That's not for him to ask.
I felt very lucky to get to kind of delve into this great historical character. He was just so truly fascinating. It was a very rewarding experience.
Oppenheimer's legacy goes beyond just physics. His legacy is having brought together so many brilliant people at one time. This led to the next 20 or 30 years of research.
His story for us today, I think, is a question of what our responsibility is towards what we make. It's a question of who do you make things for, who's going to control it in the end. Don't blindly make things and then be surprised that people use them for things that you don't approve of.